Okay, I'll call this work session of the Seward City Council to order. It's Monday, February 26th. It is 5:30 p.m. And our work session involves a discussion about the motor pool. And there's a PowerPoint and all that. I'm just going to turn it over to administration to do presentation, and then council will be asking questions. Okay?
Great, thank you, Madam Mayor. I am up here tonight with Finance Director Sue Lee and Deputy Finance Director James Schaefermeyer, who have put a lot of background work into this presentation. And I would first just say, I think it was a great idea to have this work session. We dug into a lot of the stuff, and me particularly being new in the role, it was really good to kind of work through what the motor pool is and what we utilize it for and how we should be utilizing it. So the motor pool itself, sorry, I made a joke with Jody earlier. The motor pool itself has been established since 1992, but if you want to go to the next slide, Jody. The city established 2 internal service funds through our city charter that provide services internally to city departments and employees. And one of those is our accrued leave fund, and the other is the motor pool fund. And it's an unrestricted but allocated fund for the replacement to city heavy equipment and vehicles. The motor pool also has the authority to loan money to other funds. We currently have 2 loans against our motor pool, but all amounts must be repaid with interest considered reasonable at the time of the loan. If you can go to the next slide. And so the motor pool specifically from those internal services fund established a consistent funding mechanism to replace the fleets and minimizes the fluctuation to annual operating budget when purchasing big equipment. You know, you're not struggling to cover the cost of a big grader every time that one of those goes down or different vehicles need to be replaced. And it also recognizes the annual cost of this equipment in each department's budget. The intent is to eventually fund all city vehicles and heavy equipment through this fund. So if you have a vehicle or a heavy equipment piece, you're paying annually into the motor pool for that, like a sort of lease agreement. And the city has funded and fully utilized this motor pool since 1992. Motor pool reserves, the appropriation control policy. Motor pool reserves should be preserved for the sole intended purpose of replacing city heavy equipment and vehicles based on the establishment goals of minimizing fluctuations to annual operating budgets and exercising fiscal prudence. And like I said, the loans will be repaid with interest to the motor pool in order to safeguard the viability of the replacement plan. And then on the next slide, we have the current replacement schedule that was created with our CIP through the budgeting process from 2023 to 2028, recognizing that things do change, you know, and some become a priority while others do not. And this is approved by City Council and allows for the routine and timely replacement of city vehicles at a certain mileage interval. And then if we go to the next page, we talk about the depreciation funding policy. And the policy is to fund a minimum of 100% of the annual depreciation rate, recognizing that failure. To establish adequate reserves for replacement of plant and equipment shifts the financial burden of such major repairs and replacement to future generations, creating an imbalance. Funding depreciation is defined as either placing equivalent cash into the motor pool or spending on capital repairs. And city departments pay annual lease payments to the motor pool fund for the use of vehicles and heavy equipment, with funds accumulating to finance their replacement. This mechanism reduces the need to borrow money to purchase equipment, thus saving on interest costs and reducing the impact of large purchases. So kind of reiterating the purpose of that motor pool fund. And that's just a general overview of why it exists and what its use is. Essentially, departments are paying leases into the motor pool fund annually to cover future expenses while also managing the depreciation. And then I'm going to toss it over to Sue Lee and James to go through the next few pages of information, which includes appropriations and different equipment currently in the motor pool.
Good evening. On that presentation, it doesn't look too big, but is the motor pool information has December 31st, 2023. The cash balance on that fund is 2.2 million. And can you see some appropriations are made through resolutions, and 3 of those resolutions has been ordered, but not expensed yet. So they are in transitions to expend those. So it's the resolution 2023-106, 2023-110, and 2 of the vehicles of resolution 2023-123. And in the bottom is the motor pool internal fund loan history, which currently have 2 loans against the motor pool. The first one is the Seward General Hospital PERS for liability, and then the animal shelter, which is the newest one. On the animal shelter, it does not have any interest rate.
And so something to keep in mind when you consider the unrestricted net position, also including those loan payments into that net position as well.
Correct.
So it takes it from that 1.1 closer to a 2.2 again.
That's correct. On the next presentation is the asset list needed to be replaced. So we went to the assignment of analyzing all lists, and those are assets that are completely depreciated, and those needs to be replaced. This will take consideration in how we need and what we need, because those are kind of ending on their useful life. Which is totalize the initial cost of $5.7 million. Is any questions? I'm kind of going through too fast.
So is that the original cost? Not
The initial cost, yes. That's how much the city has been spending on those assets.
Yeah, they're at historical cost.
Okay.
So if the useful life was 10 years, then these items are 100% already depreciated out?
Yes, yeah.
And
if you-
it's already the motor pool's already been repaid for
Yeah.
all that?
All
Days
that.
and days and days, years ago? Got it.
And actually, you see, it's not that book value on those assets
course.
at all.
Go ahead.
So who comes up with that? I mean, me and him talk a lot, we've got a lot of motor pool history. Who come up with the 7 years and 10 years on vehicle that sits a lot?
That is established in the policy, and in the financial statements have some kind of history on how those are being depreciated. So the extended life for equipment are 5 to 7 years.
So what I'm saying is we have a vehicle with 50,000 miles sit there for 7 years and we're gonna get rid of it when it's just got 50,000 miles on it? I've seen that happen.
Right. And according to GAAP, we are supposed to be adjusting depreciation. So if it sits for a while, then we are supposed to not depreciate it for the years it's been sitting idle.
So the other question I have is, you know, City Charter 50230 we just read clearly states any money loaned out of there is supposed to be with interest, yet we have an animal shelter with 0 interest.
So on that one, but it was approved by council, I believe it was in 2022.
Correct.
Where interest was removed, but it was
Yes, that's
originally introduced
correct.
with interest.
That was the resolution.
So just to, if you don't mind, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
So a question would be, is there a lot of equipment out there that just sits running that would maybe have hour times on them? So they would they might have 50,000 miles on, but they might have 3,000 hours or,
Yes,
you know, there
that's
could be.
correct. And that's why I said we need to analyze this list. This is how we have on our books, right? Well, let's say we have a Jeep Wrangler 2005. We don't know the condition of the asset. We need to sit down with the department head and establish, okay, what is the useful life of this asset? Are continuing with? Can we save some money and still use it, or do we need to replace? Is plenty of funds on the motor pool, and that's why we need to analyze this list.
Did you?
Yes.
I don't know that there's plenty of funds in the motor pool, the way it looks from where it was a few years ago. So, so you verified all of these vehicles are still here on this asset list?
We have not verified all of them, no.
Okay. Does Alvin Rogers do that with our audits? Don't they come through and verify all our assets? Shouldn't they?
The capital assets are part of the audit. I don't know to what extent they have been doing it, since I am relatively new. This is only my second audit here in the city. But they are covered under the audit.
Because if we don't know if these are all still here,
Right.
then obviously it hasn't been.
Correct, and that's what I said, it needs to be analyzed. It has not been analyzed. This is what we have in our books.
Wow.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Wells.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'm looking that way more.
I know, well, I'm used to it.
Aw.
In the for-profit industry, of course, there's a very clear set depreciation schedule for assets. Not being from the government side, right, when it comes to the financial is there a clear, are those definitions very similar from the for-profit for the business side, the depreciation life expectancies?
Yes, they are, but in both cases, whether in private or in public, there's a lot of judgment that goes into determining those useful lives. What we have here is how they've been over the years. So policy was set years ago on these, and so those were the years that were set on those. And like I said earlier, is that a true analysis of this, if there were any that were idle, I mean, they wouldn't be depreciated over that year that it was idle or years that it was idle. Also, if it's still being used, we also can adjust with the lifespan as well.
Correct.
So all we have here is just everything we have on our books as of the end of last year.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I would be interested in seeing what the depreciation schedule is for each item, right? Because I see where it says useful life 10 years, 8 years, 10 years. Well, I take that back. I can see what the depreciation schedule is. I'd like to see why we have this depreciation schedule.
Okay.
And that relies part of the policy of the city.
I understand, yeah, so maybe, and maybe it's a policy, maybe it's a policy that we need to,
Yeah, definitely. But that would be just in base, again, in how we analyze those assets and see if we really need to replace those, right?
last one.
Oh, yeah. And
Last
then-
one.
Yeah, go ahead. and
Thank
then I'll
you,
get
sorry,
to-
Bob. We can all agree, I would think, that some of these items on here, for example, just 2009 Chevy Impala, for example, right? There's no real value there. It is done depreciated. It would cost more, even if it needed a radiator, it would cost more to repair it than it's actually truly worth. And so, are we,
Especially in Alaska.
especially in Alaska, yeah. And then I remember when I first got on council, the fire chief was talking about why we needed new fire trucks, and they had their Dodge 5.9 Cummins diesels. They had very low hours, and it was explained to me that, let's say it's got a bad electric board inside. Yes, we could go to any junkyard and buy a replacement electric board, but we can't. But our attorney, and I'm saying this more for the public, I should say, our attorney said you have to be really careful whether you start putting used parts in city vehicles, and it becomes a liability.
Yes,
Is that correct?
it is correct.
Okay. So a lot of these items then are so old, even if they do run, they might not be worth maintaining.
It might be not.
Okay.
Councilmember.
Couple comments. I was in one of those vehicles yesterday. It was a PCR, the Parks and
Police
Rec.
car?
No, the Parks.
I know.
All right. No, in the Parks and Rec van, and that thing had 25,000 miles on it. And the door barely opens, but they only use it, they only use it, I don't know how many times, well, probably use it in the summer quite a bit, but not much, it's 25,000 miles. So would we replace that? I don't know. I mean, that one probably does need it. But the other one, the big items here on the bottom are the fire, obviously
The fire, yes.
And I know one of these is probably the ladder truck that we didn't buy that long ago
Yes.
that we're repairing. That's probably what, the $400,000 one or?
Yeah.
So some of those fire trucks we probably don't want to, we're probably not looking at replacing, so that's $1 million right there
That's correct.
of the 5.
Councilman.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just a couple things, just so I can make sure that I'm clear, and maybe there are a couple people that might need a little clarity. The motor pool fund was started, and I think Rick Gifford was actually here when that started. And the idea was to take all of the city vehicles at that time and put them in the asset list. And then they would pay rent, whatever you want to call it, lease, into the motor pool fund for each of those vehicles, so that when the time came,
They can pay.
they could get a new vehicle to replace that.
Yeah.
Okay? It was not designed for a department to buy a vehicle that's not on the asset list, a brand-new piece of equipment or vehicle. That should be funded from the enterprise fund or the general fund first. Then it's put into the asset list, and then it's started to pay rent on that to replace that when the time comes. That's my understanding, talking to people that were here historically involved in doing that.
Yeah.
So I guess my only comment on that is, are we still doing that? Or do we need to look at making an adjustment to the policy so that we're all clear on how this motor pool fund should be used when it comes to purchasing vehicles? Because every department, as we know, in their budget, pays X number of dollars a year into the motor pool fund. Which means if we're just purchasing a big brand new piece of equipment, every department's paying for that. In essence, if it
Because
comes
it
out of the
Because
motor
it
pool
hasn't
fund
paid lease payments into
and
the
haven't
pool.
paid for it ahead of time. So I guess my concern is because, you know, it was only a couple, 3 years ago that my understanding was the motor pool fund was sitting at a little over $4 million. That may or may not be true.
Yeah.
It's information I was given by a previous administration. I never saw the actual numbers.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple loans out there and that kind of thing, so I get that. But I just want to make sure that when we get done with this work session, there's going to be other questions and things, but that we're kind of all on the same sheet on how the fund should be used,
Correct.
so that it just replenishes itself, because at the end of the year, the balances shouldn't vary all that much. And also in that, are we taking into account every year, I know there's depreciation, I get that, but are we also taking into account what it's actually going to cost to replace that vehicle because the prices are going up? You know, maybe the motor pool fund contributions that are made need to be tied to the, you know, CIP or something,
Yeah.
That's,
because we're going
Inflation
to be
yes,
killing
that's
ourselves
one of,
if we're
on
not
our
there.
prepositions for motor pool, but making the clarification, the once in one of those years, the motor pool was sitting in 4.4 million. I don't recall when, but it was close to the pandemic season. So what happened was, the city was, all of these departments were contributing into the fund, but it was not expenses. So what it was accumulating the cash into the fund, right? Other qualification that I want to say is the use of the motor pool is to replenish that that expense or that big expense for any equipment. So that way we don't have to touch, for instance, general fund, where you have the funds into the motor pool. Now let's take, like, for instance, SMIC. SMIC is now doing some payments because they are trying to get the crane, a new crane, right? So they are contributing now to the motor pool because they are planning to spend that in the near future. I believe that is the main use of the motor pool, to not touch any other funds.
Okay, I'm not sure that I totally agree with that, but is there, if I asked you, and I'm not going to ask for it right this second, maybe it's already back here, and I just haven't seen it. Do I know exactly how much money each department has sitting in the motor pool fund right now?
Yes.
Is it part of the stuff that you gave me?
Mm-hmm. So in, what is the? Yeah, the contribution.
Because I see the account numbers, but I can't always tell who that is.
That was just the account number.
Because all I see is account numbers, and it would be nice to know.
Okay.
If, you know, just so we can tell
Okay.
who has how much money, because things come to us in resolution to buy something, and it would just be nice to know where the motor pool fund is, if it's broken out that way inside the fund itself.
Was there? Yeah.
But here is the contribution that those departments have contributed, and it
Right,
kind of
that's on
give
the
you
back
an
page, right?
idea.
Yeah, the back page.
Kind of give you kind of an idea of how much the funding are. If you compare 2022, that was a higher contribution than in 23. And in 22, we barely have some expenses in the fund.
Also, on the, apologies for not having them match up, but if you look at this page, it has the contributions to the motor pool in 2024, and those are the same, in the same order as the one in the back. So just to kind of clarify for right now, and then we can give you an
What
updated one
page
later.
was there?
The page directly after the PowerPoint, and then the last page. So 2024 motor pool information, the first one of the Excel documents, and then the final page of the Excel documents. It
Yeah.
has contributions to motor
Oh,
pool.
and those are the same order
Yeah.
as the one I just had.
They're
Okay.
nearly the same order,
Okay,
just to give you a better idea.
right.
Like so
Oh,
close.
where's the?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's in fire department.
Yeah.
So that's street operations, I thought it was, okay, that makes sense.
So we can adjust that, and apologies for not making that clear, but
That's fine.
yeah.
Councilmember Barnwell, you had.
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying to get my head around this. So, basically, the amount of money that each department puts into there is their projected need going forward. So,
Is
for
in-
instance, SMIC needs a certain amount of equipment. 5 years from now, they're gonna put so much per year into that account to get to that level.
In that situation, under current policy, that's how we've been operating, of having it cover the lease payments, and then with SMIC, they want to buy that crane in the future, so they've been putting that extra in.
So, but what happens when a department has unexpected expenses? How does that, they take a loan out on the whole loan? on
Is
the whole-
the unexpected expense,
Let's say a police
vehicular?
cruiser goes down and they need to buy another one, because
Yeah.
they weren't anticipating that. Do they take a loan out on the motor pool?
No, they
No.
just expensive.
They would just
motor
expense the
pool.
motor
They will
pool.
ask for resolution and explain why the emergency is and utilize the motor pool.
yeah.
So it's kind of.
But it doesn't necessarily match their.
As
what
of
they
right
put.
now, no, it doesn't match.
So how does each department know exactly how much they're putting in? Is that just a?
That's the great
That's
mystery.
part of the bigger question,
That's-
as we work
that's-
through this, yeah.
That's the
That's
question.
the ultimate question.
And that's the budget that we approve. It's in the budget,
Yeah.
how much they're gonna put in. The thing that we have to start taking into consideration is, are we gonna do just replacement of assets that are already there, and look at different funding to purchase something brand new that's not in there, and put that in the asset list, and then they start paying rent on that to replace it down the road? Or are the you know, the enterprise funds or the general fund or whatever gonna buy that brand new toy. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to anybody, but something new that we haven't had. And because I know that, for instance, in the harbor, they're also, you know, they're putting money in there to replace travel lifts. Those are probably the most expensive pieces of equipment or close that we have. And so they're putting more money in for that ahead of time and to replace it. If something were to happen and we had to buy it, maybe they haven't put enough in yet to fully pay for one, so we'll figure that out. But I think that I just sort of get a feel that we kind of got away from what the motor pool fund was set up for. And not that change is not good, but we need to all understand, I think, and know, okay, this is what our policy is going to be going forward.
Right.
Because we're currently in a situation where it's unrestricted but allocated. So with that, there's flexibility across the board of what parameters we put into place when we buy new vehicles. But if a policy is set forth for administration to follow in the purchasing of new equipment that we haven't had before, we could follow that policy. Yeah, it's just kind of figuring out what works best and what you have in mind and how we can incorporate that into what we do.
And
Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, I have kind of this is going to sound silly probably, but I'm looking on this first page of asset lists that need to be replaced. And about halfway down, it says transmission repairs.
Yeah.
I have questions.
How is that a motor pool fund issue? You know, and the useful life is 4 years, so after 4 years,
New
that transmission needs to go away. You know, things like that, I think we need to get cleaned up and get a better handle on exactly what our assets are. The other question that I had, if you don't mind, Madam Mayor, when we dispose of one of these pieces of equipment, if we sell it, where does that money go?
Goes in motor pool.
Goes back into the motor pool
Yes.
fund.
has a surplus.
If a piece of equipment that's on here that's no longer able to be used by a department is given to another department, how do we account for now the change?
We
in
transfer it
rent?
to the
We
department.
transfer it, and that probably needs to be cleaned up a little bit too. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely needs a little bit of cleanup in the policy side and also in our books as well. I think this conversation will clearly some mods and have those policies in place from now on. Actually, if you go to the last page, in the meantime that we are working, and this is kind of a preposition for you, in the meantime that we are working on getting those policies in place, the motor pool has enough fund to just in 2025 saving all of that contribution and start on working on a new contribution in 2026. That's just a preposition. Even with that year, skipping that year of contributions, the fund has enough money to cover all the expenses.
Without anything unexpected.
Without anything.
With, of course.
And I'd like to add one thing. So historically, and so when the fund first began, what would they would do, and so when, say, like the electric department wanted a new vehicle, they would do a transfer out of that fund into the motor pool fund. So it'd be a transfer out of electric fund into motor pool fund, and then that would then that would start the process, then electric fund would then pay based on that transfer out of their fund into the motor pool fund on an annual basis. So I think we probably should start doing that if we haven't already.
So in reality, that piece of equipment was being purchased by a
Right.
enterprise fund or whatever,
Right.
whichever one.
But they're making
Yes.
the transfer to the motor pool.
Right.
Well,
and-
right,
Yeah, for
they
new
transferred
equipment.
it to there, bought
Right.
the equipment.
Yes, for brand new equipment that wasn't already motor pool,
But
yeah.
it wasn't it wasn't actually being taken out of the motor pool fund without
No.
putting it in first.
Right.
That's,
yes.
yeah, that's a good point. But I do think that maybe we should talk to Alderman Rogers about their asset inventories when they do their audits, because I don't think they've done that, or we would have a better picture of where we were at.
Yeah.
Yeah, back to the silly questions again, but, so that's where I get confused, because each department has their enterprise fund, and we have a motor pool fund. Is the motor pool fund basically for depreciation, to track depreciation?
Yeah, that's one of the intent of the tracking depreciation too.
So when the
On the,
Public Works Department has an enterprise fund, they're planning for their new equipment based on what they have in the enterprise fund, more than say the motor pool fund. Is
but
that true?
they,
like the whole-
depends on the public works, because if it's the general fund, well, yes, for the motor pool. But
There's-
if, go ahead.
No, sorry, my mistake.
If they are expensive from the enterprise fund, which is water or sewer, yes, it will be a transfer for.
Because not all public works items fall within the public works enterprise fund.
No,
Some are in
no,
the general fund.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if you're thinking about a certain aspect of public works, it's in there. Or more specifically, the electric, since it's all under, or not all
On
of it,
the
the majority under the enterprise fund. You can think about it in that way. So I think some next steps, you know, I think the finance team did a great job of pulling all this information together that didn't necessarily exist before, and we're excited about that. And moving forward with, if council would like to give any recommendations moving forward with the motor pool, or what their thoughts are, have some further discussions, see what we can.
Can I add a little history?
Yeah, of course.
to it? I don't know, do I have to go to the microphone or?
It'd help,
Yeah.
Yeah.
just for everything.
Just, I'm probably the longest employee, at least here, other than Norm, as far as what's going on with the motor pool and how that's worked in the past. And the motor pool itself, as you have that fund going, you're right, you have different streets, parks and rec. A lot of us are under just general fund. So do we take money from a general fund to make a purchase to do that? A lot of the motor pool funds, and I don't have the history of how exactly this was set up, a lot of them start with a seed money, and it's a loan program. It's not, hey, we pay as you go. So then you buy a truck, you use $70,000 out of the motor pool. Now you're paying that $70,000 back into that motor pool fund, which has already been set up. At one point, we had at least that $4 million in there, and some other things have taken place since then, but the equipment we've got out there, it would be nice to have a policy on how long and where you keep it. A lot of this stuff we're keeping 20 years at least, some of it. These graders, the one that's coming up for, it's just about gone. It's broke down again. We're trying to get that one replaced, but it's whatever that was, 500 and some thousand to do that coming up. Every year it escalates, and to your point, do we put in for increases as things get? Basically, what you do on the loan program, you're paying back what you borrow. So the streets department now, say, when this goes through for, and I want to say it was 590,000 for this grader coming up. Now the general fund budget in the streets department has to reflect that motor pool payment of where that's going back into. So whichever department buys that, that is part of their budget. We have to decrease other things, squeeze in, we have to increase. That's where you see as the council, how do we do this? In the past, there's been many, many years, just in the last 8 years, I'll bet you 4 of them have suspended motor pool payments for departments. Suspended them out because the budget was that tight. Nobody paid in, other than, I believe the harbor was able to keep paying on that SMIC travel lift. They kept working that one in, but most of them did not. It was part of the council budget. You know, city manager, finance at the time, I believe Chris Urshiner was here at that time, and going through, and that was how they were able to try to balance a budget. The motor pool was this, at the time, it had a lot of money in it, and it's like, okay, let's let's hold off. But how does that bide for the future? And how do you make these policies to go through? You know, I'd sure like to see the discussion go on, because you really do need to have what can it be spent on and how is it spent. Working at the borough, I was in the roads department at the borough. I could go buy a pickup if I put it in my budget, and it never went to the motor pool if I bought it out of my own budget. Motor pool didn't pay for it, and I don't expect the motor pool to pay it back. When we need a new truck, we budget for a new truck. That's how that department was able to work those. But mainly when you have these bigger vehicles, fire trucks and graders and sander trucks, I mean, you're talking 400,000, 300,000. They're big, big purchases. And to that, we had a question about a transmission. It's not budgeted, but that grader transmission goes out, $35,000. Where do you take it from? And I think the decision was made both by administration and council at the time that, hey, that's a piece of equipment. We take it out of that. Now streets gets hit for another loan on the 31, so they're paying for it. But if you didn't have seed money up front for the motor pool to make a fund, then you're depleting it for everyone else. Who, you know, we're all paying into it. We're all expecting to be able to purchase the equipment as we need it, but as it gets depleted, I mean, we have to be sure that that's equipment going in there, but at the time, that transmission's not budgeted. So as a council or as an administration, we have that choice to look at, hey, do we have money in the general fund to just do that and not take it out of the motor pool? But those are decisions that are made every year that we go through these things as equipment. Whether it's an unexpected, just crash, die on a piece of equipment, it's done, or if it's a repair. But the longer we keep things, the more it costs. We've had the old yellow sander now, it's 30 years old, it's given us a good life, but we purchased it for $102,000 back in, I want to say, late 90s, 95, 94, I think. Since then, we've put $104,000 into repairs on it. But in 30 years, is that bad spent? You know, how can you do some of those? So some of the things are just on a case by case as we come in. We try to take them out of budget, out of our operating funds when we can. But when they're a big purchase or a big repair, it's really hard to do that and try to make those funds happen. So that's where the motor pool would come in. It's kind of a loan program, and then the department that the plow breaks off the big sander, but it's not repairable. If we need a new plow on it and it's $10,000, we don't have that in the budget. So there's a lot of things that I just want to be sure as we're looking at these at a motor pool and setting a policy that we don't put ourselves in a corner where now what do we do? I mean, however it works, it's good to have the policy, but you have to look at if you have something unexpected, what you do with that and how. Because unexpected isn't prepaid in it. You know, and I'm okay with whichever way we do it, but in the last 8 years, it's been, you have the motor pool already there that was, and I could be wrong, I was told that at the end of the year when we had good years, a lot of that excess funding that we had would go into motor pool to help fund that. I don't know if it ever did, but I was told that that's what had happened. If there's a couple 200,000 that you still have left in your budget from 2021, it goes into the motor pool, or a portion of it, into the motor pool to help fund it, because that helps control your escalation in prices, because every year everything keeps going up. So there's a number of different ways, but I just encourage, look at it, talk to Norm, talk to myself, talk to others that have been there. Like, you know, Mike, you said you talked to some other folks that were here even back as they set it up, and how really was it? And was it set up the right way? It probably might have been. What's other communities doing? What's the borough doing on theirs? You know, to make a viable, you have to have some sort of motor pool or equipment replacement fund. So anyway, I just wanted to throw 2 cents in there.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a quick question. You mentioned the grader, and so line item 1310 is the 2006, made me think of it because of your hat. the Volvo Moto Grader, that's the one that we want to replace?
I think there's a 2001 in there.
Okay.
I believe the one we're trying to replace is
So who's
23
beeping?
years old.
Kevin, you've got something beeping occasionally. Sorry.
So is that the International?
No, it's a Volvo.
Stop.
It's a Volvo 740. Does it show on there?
Yeah,
Which-
is the 2021 Volvo Grader.
Yeah, what's the number?
Vehicle 113.
113. 113.
2001 Volvo Grader.
I don't see it. Oh,
113.
Yeah, so third
On
call.
Vehicle number.
Vehicle number.
Oh, I see, vehicle number, sorry, I was looking at the department, 113, got it. So we purchased that for, so is the one that we're replacing this one with equivalent or larger?
Pretty much equivalent size to that one.
And the reason why I ask is I just wanted to do the inflation math from 2001 to 2024, and the new one's how much?
590, I think. is coming in.
598.
You'll see it here in another week or two, I think.
Would it be feasible to, when we're putting money into the motor fund, we borrow the money and then the department puts the money back in there, couldn't we look at the historical data and find out what an average inflation rate for a particular piece of equipment is, and then
That's one
add
of the
that
proposals
to,
too.
for the department, so the department knows, okay,
Yep.
I'm gonna put $1 in to replace, but then I gotta add
Plus the
my
CAP.
7% inflation rate or whatever it is. Is that feasible
I
by
think
any way?
that you could set up most anything on that. I think the way it's been, and like I said, right or wrong, the way it's been going is you buy it and that's what you put back in it.
Right.
And like you say, eventually it goes, but if you keep that piece of equipment, if it's relatively good, like some of these that only have 50,000 miles and you keep it for 20 years, you've paid it back in 10 years.
Sure.
Right? And so now as it goes, it may be getting used back and forth, but now somebody else is putting in as they buy something else. So ideally, it's a perpetuating thing, but it's hard with inflation. And I think without direction of some way to bring some other funds in, and that's one way. All right, we charge extra interest to that loan. How do we want to do that? I think it's hard for a department to go in and say, I can pay $100,000 out of the budget when we don't have it in the budget, and put that in the motor pool to buy it, or to buy it for the 100,000 and then pay back 100,000 to pre-fund the next one. It's a hard thing, especially the higher the price gets. And that's where, like I said, my experience with it has been, it's more of a loan program that you pay it back, and by the time you pay it back, hopefully, that's your piece of equipment has lasted at least that long, and you at least have the majority of that money in there to pay it back. You would have the inflation on it, and then dealing with that is gonna be an issue.
Going back to what going forward, I think one thing we need to do is do an inventory. Each director actually goes through and makes, a detailed inventory of what we have, what's usable, what needs to be replaced. And the other thing is the capital improvement plan motor pool, there's only, 12 items on there right now. They seem to be bigger items, so making sure that that's, really go through each one of that with each director to make sure going forward, and then this is 5 years out.
Part of what you can just afford in your budget. Try to make it, I can't buy 4 graders and hope to make a payment if I needed, and that's where I'm at with this grader. Every 7 years, I'm trying to beat, so it's a 21-year replacement. I have 3 graders, I try to buy one at basically 20 years old. That's every 7 years.
So is it possible that you could do you have a list, and you have a priority list, and you have a wish list kind of thing, where you're like, hey, these are things we absolutely are going to need next 5 years, and these are the things that we really would like to have. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it's sort of
and that's our 5-year plan Kat was talking about that was there, but when you look at that changes every year with the budget, because some of those things become a lot higher priority or lower priority. So we try to forecast that the best we can out 5 and even 10 years to say, here's what we've got, which I encourage, that'd be something that, as a city, to have a 5-year, a 10-year plan. You know you're not gonna be right on for 10 years out, but you have those plans of not just equipment, that's on the city itself. I think you can see good examples of that out there, and it just helps in planning. You know, it's a little more than just your strategic plan or comprehensive plan, it's a 5-year, 10-year capital plan.
Madam Mayor,
Yeah.
thanks. So I guess sort of, the gist of this a little bit is, if you're going to, say for instance, this grader thing comes up and it gets approved, use that as an example, then the motor pool is going to loan you $570,000 to purchase that piece of equipment, if we want to talk it that way. So then you're going to start making payments from your budget to replace that over the period of its useful life or depreciation years or whatever it is. But then don't we need also, and we've talked about the CIP, but I don't know if don't we need to then also bump maybe the payments from, to the motor pool fund so that when the time comes, okay, you paid the loan off in 7 years. And now we need to buy a new one, and it's $782,000. Well, we want to be able to make sure that we haven't just paid back the loan, but put more money in there to actually replace it again so we're not being detrimental to the other departments and the money they put in. And I'm not saying you specifically, it was just an example because that's coming up, so I think that's what we need. We kind of need to look at how we can bump that so that we're not just paying back that amount, because in 7 years that amount's not going to buy
It's
that
gonna be completely
piece of
different.
equipment again.
Yeah, I think the landscape, especially in vehicle purchasing, has changed so drastically even the past 4 years versus 10 years, and then we're talking 20 or 30 or 23 for the grader. So figuring out a way to incorporate
And
that.
I don't know
in the
how that
policy.
EV grader's going to work
Yeah.
anyway.
And just be aware too, as you're doing that, and try to figure out that mechanism,
Yeah.
everybody still has to have a budget. And that budget's gonna come before you, and all those department budgets, when we escalate that 7% or 10%, whatever that is, those payments, that escalates that budget on everybody's to try to make those things happen. So, yeah, I encourage you, what's the best way? Is there a better way? Is there what, is there cruise ship money that can't go to that? I'm just throwing that out, cruise ship can't do it, but
Yeah,
is there
so-
other avenues of ways to do that? So that's, right, it's gotta have some way to do it, and how to do it, or whether you're doing a loan program, or you're trying to pre-fund and then pay it again to have the money for the next one. The idea is when you pay your loan back, now that money's back in there to buy the next one or close to it. But the escalation has really, like she said, the last 5-10 years, these things, especially after COVID and all the shortages, and man, the prices have gone for everything, not just equipment.
Let me get Councilmember Kreitz first.
No, to what you were saying, I was just going to give an example because I am familiar with what's going on with the fire department. So we have a non-functioning ladder truck, Truck 35, that was purchased in the early 2000s. And I believe at the time it was purchased, there was roughly like $450,000, $500,000 that was allocated by council. And I think they bought it for it was a used ladder truck they bought from California and they bought it for $150,000. So it's already, the lifespan on that is 20 years, so it's already past its lifespan, and it has not been working. To replace that truck is $1.2 million. Yep.
What's the cost?
Just very brief.
No problem.
That's where the balancing act is. Is
But
it
it's-
cheaper to
but it's
repair it?
But it's past its useful lifespan is 23 years old.
So isn't the motor pool fund invested, so is it earning some investment returns?
Yes.
All of the.
I think around $50,000 a year it brings in returns. Last year they actually had, due to the bond market, they actually had a negative adjustment, but interest was still over around $15,000 in that.
And is that money dumped back in?
Yes, and that goes in the motor pool.
pool.
Right.
And is it worth looking at how we invest that, or that's probably a complicated formula, but I mean, it
Those
sounds like a
are
pretty low,
based in market.
pretty
So,
conservative.
yeah,
Return.
the city is very conservative when it comes to the market and then the investment, so it probably could be. But I won't realize, I will not rely on investment.
Yeah.
Not for now.
I'm just saying for inflation proofing, that would help.
Correct.
Yes, it will help a little bit, yeah.
Councilmember Wells.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, as we are currently, we have all this new construction, which I'm extremely happy about. We have new roads going in, we have new homes going in, new streets and sidewalks and all that type of stuff going in, and it's going to continue to grow. When we charge a developer for services, right, to put the road in and put the power and put the water and all that into an area that they're developing, do we, since we can't make a profit, how do we budget additional equipment and additional labor to maintain those additional streets? If I'm under the impression correctly that when we bill a contractor for that, we just charge for what the current cost is, but we're not also including what it's going to cost to maintain it. Is that correct?
Right now, we're doing developer reimbursement, so you're paying half of it already, and we're
Right.
not taking any of that in. We're not billing them for anything.
I understand, but let's, even if we were doing development, let's just, for a second, we're not doing a development reimbursement program, just for a second. When the developer pays to pay for the utilities and everything to be brought forward, in that bill, is there a spot for us to charge some amount for future equipment? Because the bigger our community gets and the more streets and more sidewalks we get, the bigger these pieces of equipment, the more often they're going to be used, the more often we're going to have to replace them, correct?
Correct. More roads, more mileage.
More roads,
but
more
you
mileage.
also have more houses and more property.
More
that
property
You're
tax.
charging property tax, getting more income, and you're having more customers paying for water and sewer and electric
Fuel,
services.
everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're adding to those by upping those as you increase more housing, more building going on. And yes, we, look at a couple subdivision things, and we're adding a few roads here and there, and everything takes more time. Takes
But
more
what you're suggesting is we should be putting more into the
Well,
motor pool.
yeah, so what I'm wondering is if we're budgeting a piece of equipment for forecasting its useful life to be 10 years, but in 10 years we are adding 25% more roads, then are we really budgeting the useful life? Because if we add 25% more roads hypothetically, well then we have to shorten the useful life of that equipment, correct? So what I'm asking is are we budgeting for that? Are the departments budgeting for future growth, and so which would be additional use on the equipment, more wear and tear, shorter lifespan?
I think you're going to be looking at additional use, but you're also going to be looking at some point an additional employee. As departments, the town grows, departments have to grow. I mean, you can't keep doing all the same stuff with the smaller. And it's what we all across the country are doing. Everybody's trying to do a little more with less. And that's what we've been doing for years, trying to do. But at some point, you have to look at where it's at. I'm not as much equipment-wise, other than you may need another piece of equipment. I don't think longevity that you're going to wear it out any quicker. You're still going to be out there those same hours per day, but you may need to add an additional piece of equipment.
So how does
How do we
that
budget?
happen?
That's what I mean. How do we
the question.
forecast and budget for that?
That then
That
have to
would be
come
a
out of
buy-in.
the motor pool to do a loan or however that's set up, right? So here we are back at that. It's a new piece of equipment, not one that's been already working through.
And we are in a position where these houses don't get built overnight.
Mhm.
So on our biannual budget cycle, those are things that we can take into account, saying, oh, the new Hilltop development is in, and it turns out we have X amount more hours of plowing that we have to do. We need to budget for X. So that's
So
something,
that-
a conversation that we can have as it moves forward. But at the core of replacing or at the core question of buying new equipment, I guess it's kind of moving forward with figuring out what the policy direction that council would like of
Okay.
where those funds come from, and if we allocate them from the general or the motor.
Councilman?
Since we brought it up, what is the status of the DRP program?
In which regards?
The amount of money there, or if any, since spring's coming and people be building, we need to be looking at that since spring's coming.
We could get that at a next meeting.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
That's why I threw it out there, because it's coming again.
Councilmember Barnwell?
I'm just, since we're brainstorming here, it makes more sense that a new piece of equipment would come out of the general fund. Keep the motor pool that would be added to the motor pool going forward, but the funding would come out of the general fund. Because if it gets too convoluted, we can't track these things. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Well, I think maybe comes out of the general fund depending on what the piece of equipment is, or it comes out of an enterprise fund,
Yeah.
depending on that. But
Then move
I
over
think,
to-
you know, for me, and I can't speak for everybody, I would personally just, I would just kind of like to see you guys with all of this come back and
More detail?
more detail.
I agree.
With a
more
policy
solid
in
policy.
place and
Great,
Please.
propositions, yeah, of course.
cool. I think it was really good guidance to figure out and set the landscape and make sure we're all on the same page, and then we'll come back to you in some time with some more information,
Yeah, because
some policy direction.
council member, I think we're the two longest council people here, and I'm not sure we've ever had this exact discussion.
No, it's good, yeah. It's a great discussion to have
So-
ahead of budget cycle season,
Yeah.
so.
In so much
Yeah.
detail,
I mean,
actually.
it's forward thinking, and we all need to be on the, at least understand, and the same understanding of what's going on, you know, because we have the same goals. It's just kind of hard to explain to people too. I mean, citizens, if we don't,
Well, yeah.
it'd still be hard to explain, but maybe we can refer them to this
To this video.
Chris video, yeah. Because, I mean, the questions come up.
Yeah.
all the
I
time.
would imagine the stress for directors, you know, have being clarified for you directors would be beneficial also.
Well, I mean, it's just to the point of like bringing it up, and so any piece of equipment, even when we have it in the budget, doesn't mean we get it. Right? We come to council with the resolution to say, here's what it is, we had it listed in the budget documents, and we expect to make it go, because we're trying to work it through, just like I said, I'm on a 7-year, and in 21 years, this one will be ready to replace. But I have 3 graders that I have to do that same program, trying to keep those, so I don't want to try to buy 2 at once.
No.
That the amount of money to do it, if you can cycle those through and kind of start working them where you're paying one off, and as you pay one off, you're ready to get, another one going through. It's just kind of a continuous thing.
My last question, and I'm not being sarcastic. Could we,
I don't think so. I think we're getting like a 50% discount on the price, 45% right now through using the other government contracts through.
Okay.
Sourcewell.
hey,
It's
Yeah.
it's a valid question.
Had to ask.
It's a
I think
valid
it was
question.
listed at almost 800,000, and I think we're at 590 or something to go through it all. So,
Thanks, Doug.
working on those contracts helps. We do search around.
Oh,
We
yeah.
go through, we call direct, try to get what's the pricing on them, put it out, here's what we've got, but the state's gone out to bid already on several of these. We look at their quotes. What do they get? We look at the Sourcewell. It's a membership that we're all into, buy equipment and other things. So we look at that. What's our best thing to go through? And so most of these people across the country, most of these companies are part of Sourcewell. And so we can look at those that have been bid out and see what we can do to save money on.
thanks, Tom.
Councilmember Barnwell.
The question I had for you is like, when you guys sell, you guys have, you in the harbor have some big equipment that you might sell. Does that does that money go into it, is it targeted for your program, or does it go into the general fund, motor pool fund?
It goes to the general motor pool. It goes to the motor pool.
It should just get dropped into the main motor
Main
pool
motor
fund, but I don't know that there's, until you guys make it up, I don't know that we have a division that says, this is how much streets has, here's how much water has, here's how much electric has. I don't know that we have that.
There
You know,
should
and it might be
Yeah.
something, it'd be interesting to see, but I don't know that you really even have, you can go back and try to recreate and what has everybody paid in. But over the last, like I said, I've been here, this is my 8th year, 3-4 of those years, there were no payments that went in, and how did that get, I don't know for sure how that all goes through and makes if depreciation goes through, so there's a lot more of it that I don't see as far as that part. But we're all trying to make it work.
Yeah.
Keep things, services done.
Councilmember Catley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is not a question other than, I see the new upcoming harbor master is here,
Yes.
and wondered if he had a few minutes, if he wanted to add anything about the motor pool, or since
Right.
Norm, I think, was going to try to be on the phone, but apparently that didn't work out.
You wanna come up? It's just we can hear better and the TV can hear better.
Introducing Harbor Master Tony.
Yeah, Harbor
Yeah.
Master.
Wow.
How he is.
Low seat. Well, this will be my first sort of sit-in here. The only thing I would add is, in the upcoming handful of years, we'll be looking at replacing our 50-ton trouble lift. Just to throw one more. You guys asked about some big pieces coming up, and that would be one.
But
We're about a 20-year life right now with that one.
But you guys have been paying money in.
We have,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
And you may know off the top of your head, I think is it 100 roughly a year
Yeah.
put in? So, yeah, we've been planning this for years.
Questions for the Harbor Master? Go ahead.
I haven't got to meet you officially yet, so I just wanted to say, well,
Thank you, we'll get to know each other well.
yes, sir. Thank you.
Councilmember Barlow.
So I'm wondering if so for the cruise ship tax, harbor tax, how does that work for you guys in terms of, have you, I mean,
He's new.
I get that we've taken the money, but in terms of the equipment, or can that be applied to any of your?
I do not believe so.
It's
Very specific on what
very
those passenger
specific.
fees can be used for.
It's very specific, has to be of help for the cruise ship, the passengers, and we've gone through it. I mean, when I was on the assembly, people were always wanting things that weren't related like that, so it's a very specific
I
thing.
do know that, I just.
I know.
Slinging in the wind.
And we are currently looking at replacing some equipment with those funds right now. We're
Yeah,
out-
there are
We're going out to
some
bid right now for some, for a piece. So.
Okay.
Great, so we'll take some time and we'll dig into some of these bigger projects and come back to you within the next couple of council meetings with some policy choices and recommendations from our end. And a big thank you for having this discussion. I think it's a really useful one, especially as we hit the budget season this year. So,
Okay, thank you. Anything else from
yeah, do you guys have anything?
guys? No? Okay, are we all good? Okay, I'll close the work session at 6:33. We've got some time. We'll be back at 7 with our